Was Mathias Rust crazy or a hero? He called himself a peace messenger. He wanted to build a bridge between Reagan and Gorbachev. He wanted to melt the ice between East and West. His plan was simple. He would rent a Cessna 172. He would take off from Helsinki. He would fly to Moscow. He would land in Red Square, and he would deliver a message of peace to the world. It was a crazy idea. It looked like suicide. Soviet fighter jets could tear him apart. Missiles could shoot him down. Air defense could kill him. But Rust did not care. He was 19 years old. He felt immortal. He wanted to do something big, and he did. For 5 hours, he flew through Soviet airspace. He crossed over 1,000 kilometers. He landed in the heart of Moscow. The world watched in disbelief. Had this really happened? Had a teenager really beaten Soviet air defense? Rust was either very brave or very crazy, perhaps both. This is the story of Mathias Rust, the teenage pilot who flew into the heart of the Cold War's most fortified enemy, the dreamer who humiliated the world's most powerful military, and the young man whose act of madness changed the course of Soviet history. Mathias Rust was born in Wedel, West Germany in 1968. He was an unremarkable young man in most respects. Average student, quiet personality, few close friends. But he had one passion that consumed him: aviation. Rust had learned to fly at age 17. He earned his private pilot's license with just 50 hours of flight time. By the standards of experienced pilots, he was barely qualified to fly at all. But Rust had grand ideas. He was obsessed with the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. He watched news reports about Reagan and Gorbachev. He read about arms control negotiations. He worried about the future of humanity. In his teenage mind, a romantic notion took hold. What if he could do something to bring the two sides together? What if a single dramatic gesture could change the world? The idea came to him gradually. He would fly to Moscow, not to attack, not to spy, but to deliver a message of peace. He would land in Red Square, the symbolic heart of the Soviet Union, and show that young people wanted peace, not war. His friends thought he was joking. His family had no idea what he was planning. Rust kept his intentions secret, knowing that anyone who heard his plan would try to stop him. In May 1987, he put his plan into action. Rust told his family he was going on a flying tour of Scandinavia. It was partially true. He rented a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, a small single-engine aircraft popular with amateur pilots. He flew from Hamburg to the Shetland Islands, then to Bergen in Norway, then to Helsinki in Finland. Along the way, he was a normal tourist pilot. He visited sites, he took photographs, he enjoyed the adventure. But all the while, he was preparing for his real mission. In Helsinki, Rust filed a flight plan for Stockholm. This was the deception. He had no intention of going to Stockholm. His real destination was Moscow, over 900 kilometers to the east. On the morning of May 28, 1987, Rust took off from Helsinki-Malmi Airport. He climbed to his assigned altitude and turned west as if heading for Sweden. Then, over the Gulf of Finland, he turned off his transponder, dropped to low altitude, and turned east, toward the Soviet Union. The teenager was crossing into the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, armed with nothing but a borrowed aircraft and an adolescent dream. Soviet radar detected Rust almost immediately. As he crossed into Estonian airspace, tracking stations picked up the small aircraft. It was flying low, heading east, with no flight plan and no transponder signal. The signature matched a light civilian aircraft. The air defense system went to alert. Fighter jets were scrambled from bases in the Baltic region. 2 MiG-23 interceptors climbed to find the intruder. The pilots found Rust's Cessna without difficulty. The small white aircraft was clearly visible against the clouds. The MiG pilots reported what they saw: a civilian aircraft, no weapons, no military markings, a single person visible in the cockpit. Now the system faced a dilemma. 4 years earlier, Soviet fighters had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing 269 civilians. The international outrage had been enormous. The military had been humiliated. New procedures had been implemented to prevent another such incident. Those procedures now paralyzed the system. Was this intruder a threat or an innocent civilian? Should they shoot it down and risk another international scandal, or let it go and hope it would turn back? Requests for instructions went up the chain of command. Officers passed the decision to their superiors. Time passed. Meanwhile, Rust kept flying. The Soviet air defense system was designed to fight World War III. It was supposed to track thousands of incoming missiles and aircraft. It was supposed to coordinate responses across 11 time zones. It was supposed to be the impenetrable shield protecting the motherland from American attack. It could not stop one teenager in a Cessna. The problems were multiple. Communication between different branches was poor. Responsibility was unclear. No one wanted to make a decision that could end their career. Everyone waited for someone else to act. At one point, Rust's aircraft disappeared from radar. He had descended to very low altitude, below the coverage of some tracking stations. When he reappeared, the radar operators assumed it was a different aircraft. They assigned it a new tracking number. This confusion was later compounded when a Soviet military helicopter flew a similar route. Some operators thought Rust's radar signature was the helicopter. Others were not sure what they were tracking. Meanwhile, Rust flew on. He crossed Estonia. He entered Russian airspace. He flew over towns and villages, fields and forests. He saw military installations below him. No one stopped him. After 3 hours of flight, Rust approached the outskirts of Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union, the most protected city in the communist world. He was going to land. Rust had studied maps of Moscow before his flight. He knew where the Kremlin was. He knew where Red Square was. He had planned to land directly in the square, in front of Lenin's mausoleum, the most symbolic location possible. As he approached the city, Rust circled to orient himself. He identified the Moscow River, the distinctive towers of the Kremlin, the colorful onion domes of St. Basil's Cathedral. His original landing spot proved impossible. Red Square was crowded with tourists and closed to vehicles. Power lines and lampposts created obstacles. Rust realized he could not land safely in the square itself. Instead, he chose a nearby bridge. The Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge crosses the Moscow River just south of Red Square. On the evening of May 28th, traffic was light. Rust lined up his approach. He descended over the river. He touched down on the bridge, narrowly avoiding cars and pedestrians. The Cessna rolled across the cobblestones and came to a stop near St. Basil's Cathedral. He had made it. The teenager from West Germany had landed in the heart of Moscow. Rust climbed out of the cockpit and was immediately surrounded by curious onlookers, tourists, Muscovites, people who could not believe what they were seeing. A Western aircraft in Red Square? Rust smiled and began handing out autographs. He was living his dream. The KGB arrived within minutes. Rust was taken into custody without resistance. He had expected to be arrested. That was part of the plan. He wanted to be arrested, to stand trial, to use the platform to spread his message of peace. The interrogations began immediately. Who was he? Why had he come? Was he a spy? Who had sent him? Rust answered truthfully. He was a private citizen. He had come to promote peace. No one had sent him. He had planned and executed the mission entirely on his own. The Soviets were skeptical. How could one teenager penetrate their air defenses? It had to be a Western intelligence operation. It had to be a CIA provocation designed to embarrass the Soviet Union. But no evidence of any conspiracy was ever found. Rust was exactly what he appeared to be, a naive young idealist who had done something incredibly foolish and incredibly lucky. He was charged with violating Soviet airspace, disregarding aviation rules, and hooliganism. The maximum penalty could have been death, but Gorbachev's government had no interest in making a martyr. In September 1987, Rust was sentenced to 4 years in a labor camp. He would serve 14 months before being released as a goodwill gesture during improving East-West relations. Rust's flight caused an earthquake in the Soviet military. For Mikhail Gorbachev, the incident was a gift. He had been trying to reform the Soviet system since taking power in 1985. His policies of glasnost and perestroika aimed to modernize the country and reduce Cold War tensions. But the military was the biggest obstacle to reform. The generals controlled vast resources. They resisted any reduction in defense spending. They opposed rapprochement with the West. They represented the old guard of Soviet power. Gorbachev could not touch them without cause. Any direct confrontation risked a backlash. The military was too powerful, too entrenched, too dangerous. Then Rust handed him the perfect excuse. The teenager's flight had exposed catastrophic failures in Soviet air defense. Someone had to be held responsible. The military leadership that had allowed this humiliation could not remain in place. Within days, heads began to roll. Defense Minister Sergei Sokolov was forced to resign. He was replaced by Dmitry Yazov, a Gorbachev loyalist. Air Defense Commander Alexander Koldenov was dismissed. Over 200 senior officers were removed from their positions. It was the largest military purge since Stalin's time. And it was made possible by a teenager with a rented airplane. The purge transformed Soviet politics. With the old guard removed, Gorbachev had much more freedom to pursue his reforms. Military spending could be questioned. Arms control agreements could be negotiated. The entire Cold War posture could be reconsidered. Some historians argue that Rust's flight accelerated the end of the Cold War by 2 to 3 years. By weakening military opposition to reform, it cleared the path for the dramatic changes that would follow. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In 1990, Germany reunified. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. Would these things have happened without Mathias Rust? Probably. The Soviet system was collapsing under its own contradictions, but Rust's flight helped remove obstacles and speed the process. The teenager who wanted peace had contributed to peace, though not in the way he had imagined. What became of Mathias Rust? After his release from Soviet custody in August 1988, Rust returned to West Germany as a celebrity. He was interviewed by media around the world. He wrote a book about his adventure. He seemed destined for fame. But Rust's life took dark turns. He was drafted into the German civil service as an alternative to military service. In November 1989, he stabbed a female co-worker who had rejected his romantic advances. She survived, but Rust was convicted of causing bodily harm and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. After his release, Rust converted to Hinduism and moved to an ashram in India. He later returned to Germany and worked various jobs, including as a financial analyst and professional poker player. In interviews over the years, Rust has been inconsistent about his motivations and memories. He has sometimes expressed regret for his actions, sometimes pride. He has struggled with the gap between his youthful idealism and the complicated reality of his life. The hero of 1987 became a troubled figure. The romantic dreamer who wanted to save the world could not save himself from his own demons. What is the legacy of Mathias Rust's flight? On one level, it was a spectacular stunt with profound consequences. A single individual, armed with nothing but a light aircraft and determination, exposed the vulnerability of a superpower. The embarrassment led to a military purge that changed the course of Soviet history. On another level, it was a cautionary tale. Rust survived through luck as much as skill. He could easily have been shot down. He could have crashed. He could have caused international crisis rather than reform. His success was not replicable. The flight also raised questions about security that remain relevant today. How should military systems balance the need to defend against threats with the need to avoid attacking innocents? The dilemma that paralyzed Soviet air defense in 1987 still exists. Perhaps the deepest legacy is symbolic. Rust represented the human desire for peace in an age of nuclear terror. His act was foolish, naive, and dangerous, but it was also hopeful. He believed that one person could make a difference, and in a strange way, he was right. The Cessna that landed near Red Square is now displayed in a German museum. It stands as a monument to an era when the world was divided by ideology and fear, and to a teenager who thought he could change that. So was Mathias Rust crazy or a hero? The answer depends on how you weigh his intentions against his actions, his impact against his methods. He genuinely wanted peace. He believed in what he was doing. He was willing to risk his life for his ideals. These are qualities we associate with heroes. But his plan was reckless. He endangered his own life and potentially others. He broke laws. He caused international incidents. His later behavior showed troubling instability. These are not heroic qualities. Perhaps the truth is that Rust was simply a young man who did something extraordinary. Not a hero, not a villain, not crazy, just human. Flawed and idealistic, brave and foolish, consequential and ultimately tragic. He wanted to build a bridge between East and West. In a way, he did. The flight that was supposed to be impossible became a symbol of the impossible changes that were coming. 2 years after Rust landed in Moscow, the Berlin Wall fell. 4 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War that had defined his generation came to an end. Mathias Rust did not cause these events, but he played a small part in their unfolding. The teenager who flew to Red Square for peace lived to see a world where East and West were no longer enemies. That is something. Perhaps not heroism, but something. A 19-year-old pilot, a rented Cessna, 5 hours across enemy airspace, a landing near Red Square, and history changed.